Hey everyone, welcome to Hero History. I'm Reed.
I'm Justin.
I'm Patrick.
Peter.
And this week we're covering Static Shock.
The best.
Justin is joining us as our expert on the hero, as many of us are very unfamiliar with him outside of the old early 2000s cartoon show on CW or Warner Brothers, I think.
Yeah,
Warner Brothers
looking
Kids.
very dated now, by the way.
Otherwise, he's sort of a lesser known hero to most people.
Oh, I didn't know about him till I was told we were doing it for the show.
Yeah, but I guess it was just recently discussed, announced that casting is kind of going around.
Right.
Jaden Smith was rumored.
I
So
think he's official.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
so.
something
He's official.
Like
I think
this
it's
point.
official.
that. Is it official?
Yeah.
Okay.
Which
well,
is boo.
Sadly
Well,
official.
White Batman suit is
Right.
Static Shock. But either way, so that's kind of interesting, and so we figured that it'd be a good time to discuss the hero. So, Justin, we'll lead off with you. Tell us about Static Shock. What's his origin? What are his powers? Who is he?
All right. Well, first off, Static Shock isn't his actual superhero name. He is just Static. And the
Okay.
TV show was just called Static Shock. He still goes by Static even in the show.
Shows what we know.
Right. The show and the comic book are similar, but they're both very different. The comic book is much more grittier than the TV show, which was obviously made for a younger audience.
The children's.
Right. And sort of has a lighter mood throughout it.
Like Teen Titans.
As he electrocutes people to death.
Right. Well, he doesn't kill anybody. That's another thing that he does. He doesn't actively try to kill people. And this is
But
best...
Batman doesn't kill people and
Right.
they die.
They're just sleeping.
Right, yeah,
They're
I
sleeping.
suppose. This is best demonstrated by his origin story, which is different in both the TV show and the comic book, but involves around the same thing, which is gang wars. And that's a prevalent theme throughout everything, is violence and gangs and drugs and things like that. In the TV show, he's bullied in school by a guy named Francis Stone, also known as F-Stop, who later becomes Hot Streak after what's called the Big Bang.
Okay.
The Big Bang is this all-out gang war between all the gangs in the city of Dakota, right? And so Virgil Hawkins, who is Static, is constantly bullied by Francis Stone, and this guy Wade comes to his rescue. And then later Wade, who's part of a rival gang to F-Stop's gang, intervenes with a lot of the bullying all the time, and then expects and strong-arms Virgil to join his gang, and then sort of forces him to come to this gangbang, where he hands... That's the proper term.
That's fine.
I mean, it has other meanings,
There's two
but
terms
we're not
on the
going
internet.
there.
And let's just be honest.
Yeah. So when Static shows up at the Big Bang, or Virgil Hawkins shows up at the Big Bang, Wade hands him a gun and says, "You know what to do. You're after Francis.
Yeah, go gang.
Go
Wait,
get him."
So was the Big Bang a gang bang?
Yeah.
So it was just
Yes.
a big gang bang, basically?
Pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Clever writing.
How many people were in the Big Gang Bang? Like, was it a
So
record?
it's yeah. Jesus Christ.
I mean, what...
All right.
I can answer that, but I don't know if I want to now.
Sorry, we'll tone it down.
Yeah. So he shows up and Wade hands him a gun. He unwraps it. He goes like to himself, "I'm not sure if I'm ready to do this," and he chucks the gun into the water.
Right.
And by that point, the police arrive and they try to gas the area to bring down the violence,
tear gas,
right? And then all the gang members start open fire on the police, and then the police hit a biohazard canister, which explodes with a purple gas. At that point, Virgil runs away, hearing screams in the background of all these kids sort of melting away, potentially dying. We don't know. They don't show it on the TV show, obviously. But later he develops powers the next morning, but he doesn't remember how he got home or anything like that. Now, in the comics, it's a lot grittier in that...
It's experimental, right? The tear gas had a alternate.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah. So what happens is, instead of Francis Stone being the main antagonist in sort of his high school life, it's a guy named Martin Scarponi. And now what this guy does is he has his own gang. His name is Biz Money B.
There's no way someone named Martin Scarponi is not a gangster. I'm
Right,
sorry.
right.
You're born with Scarponi.
And now,
I guess maybe a film director.
right,
You have two options.
yeah. In the comic book, Virgil's good friend at school, Larry, is part of a gang. is actually runs a gang. He's a drug dealer, and it's pretty known throughout the whole comic book. And what happens is Larry lends a gun to Virgil and says, "Show up at this time. Big Money B's gonna be there. You know what to do. Kill him." And so Virgil goes to the gangbang willingly with a gun, wanting to kill him. And then he gets cold feet at the last moment, and again, same thing, chucks the gun in the water. The police arrive. He tries to escape. And the police are using a tear gas, as Peter said, with a chemical that's not been tested. And it was originally designed to track all the gang members. So they could,
a radioactive signature.
Right. So they could track them down and arrest them for showing up with all these illegal guns
Just
and drugs and whatever.
Fucked up in its own way.
Right.
It's good
but
commentary.
Of course it goes wrong, and well, people go unconscious, and later Virgil wakes up. He's still at the docks, which is where the fight was happening in the comics. And he notices he has powers. It makes a little bit more
sense than just a random biohazard container lying around. But
a lot better.
So, when was this published? Like, when was Static Shock first? Like, it's 80s is what it is.
1993.
Okay, so...
No, Milestone.
Sort of,
Milestone, yeah.
Sort of towards the end, also a little bit of height of, like, NWA, Compton, like, gangster... rap, the political controversy going on there, because it sounds like it's like a character just deep in like gang wars controversy. Yeah, exactly. Like it's basically meant to deal with this stuff, and so a lot of like the names even sound like they could come from like rap groups of the 90s and 80s. So
right, and that is a big thing. For instance, both Martin Scarponi and Francis Stone, who essentially play the same character, one in the TV show, one in the comics, is very what's the word I'm looking for? He's very into like hip hop culture, and he's very into his gang and everything, and they make it blatantly obvious that this is like they're running drugs, they're hitting people down and taking over the city.
Okay.
And of course the powers that all these people develop after the Big Bang make that tenfold in the Dakotaverse, or in Dakota.
So a lot of gang members get powers, and
so because they were all at the Big Bang.
Yeah, so they bring it to the...
Right, so then you have groups that start to come up, and those would be groups like... I've got all these notes here. I came prepared. You have notes like the Metabreeds, or groups like the Metabreeds, and you have the Nightbreeds, and you have the Rough Pack, and the Ragtag, and all of these sort of mini gangs.
And they call them, I believe, Bang
Babies.
Which is not a great term. But...
Yeah, no, it's not. Okay.
I read that and I was like, I don't like it.
Right, they are all Bang Babies.
So...
It sounds like a dumb slang term that you'd hear on the street, though. Like, it does sound like someone would be like, it's a bang baby.
That is true, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I read that and I didn't even think twice, but now I am. But okay.
I'll make you question everything.
This came up earlier, but just strictly in the context of the universe, like I am curious, like how many people were present at the Big Bang.
Right. So the exact numbers are never overtly stated, but they do say that there were 500 survivors.
Oh, gee, that's a lot. Was that
500 people more or less in the fights.
Okay.
But that number's never solidified or anything.
So that was more than
does it kill a lot of them and only affect
only
some of them?
10% survive.
So there's about 20, give or take, who become...
Yeah. Okay. So the show kind of glosses over the 450 people dying thing.
Right. Well, in the show, a lot more people get powers because of being near people who have had contact with the sort of radioactive gas. And that's most demonstrated with his sidekick in the show, which is this guy, Richard Foley, or known as Rich, who eventually over time, and they do this pretty well, he over time develops like a heightened genius to himself, or intellect, and becomes Gear, his sidekick.
Okay.
Nice.
So like you've explained some of the differences, you said it's a lot grittier as opposed, but like what were major changes that they made for the TV show as opposed to the grittier comic?
The biggest change is in the comic books, he doesn't have the sidekick at all.
Yeah.
He tells this girl that he really likes, this girl named Frida, who's a crush of his in the TV show and in the comics. But in the comics, he discloses to her that he is in fact Static. Whereas in the TV show, he discloses it to this Richard Foley guy who is not in the comics at all.
So is the violence toned down from the comic? Like you said, there's tons of drug stuff in the comic. Like, in the show, are they selling like gummy bears? I mean, how much of the grittiness is kept up and how much is just dropped?
Most of the violence in the TV show is like bank robberies and like trying to steal safes and things like that, or trying to capture Static, I suppose.
Does he fight with a trash can lid in the comics? That's about all I can really.
That was a
Yeah,
manhole
it's like-
cover.
It's a manhole
Okay.
cover.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure he like at one point at least like uses a trash can lid at first or something.
Probably.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, any metal object is probably up for
Okay.
grabs.
I mean, car
But-
doors, mailboxes. I don't know. The
But
list goes on.
Does that happen in the
Yeah.
comic? Okay.
He
okay.
does fly around with it.
Okay.
One interesting thing I saw was in the show, I believe, water is a weakness. In the comic books, he uses it to fight. Do you know why they changed that, or like what the point of that was?
Probably simplification for the show.
Right.
maybe.
The major. I mean, the TV show and the comics are really
They're
different,
so
and
different.
they're
Yeah.
not.
They just
really,
took liberties
yeah.
all over the place. Okay.
So, which one before I want to dive deeper into like the themes involved essentially, but I'm just curious like before we go any deeper of your personal opinion, which do you like better? Do you think that, or I get a feeling that you probably might have liked the comics better because it's more mature and doesn't tone down stuff, but I mean I could be wrong, but which do you like better, and does the TV show even do the comics justice per se? Because there sometimes are incidents, where TV shows or movies just like are horrible indications of the comics.
What?
I'd say they're different entities entirely and can't really be looked at, I guess, comparatively. I do like the comics, but the comics do end after 45 issues, I believe.
Does it end well, or did it get canceled?
It was not as popular as they had hoped. But then in 2000, after their 45 issues or so had been released, they released another thing, which is where you get the outfit that was then used in the TV show. But after that point, the TV show, I suppose in the later seasons, there starts to get a lot of crossover with other DC stuff,
Right.
because that's when DC's
animated boom was
bought
still
up,
growing.
all of Milestone and
Okay.
tried to convert it all into their universe. So you start to get a lot of crossover, and then you get sort of episodes where Static is an adult and he's working with like the Justice League and things like that. And those are, I didn't even realize I had my phone on the table. And those are really good episodes. And I mean, pretty much any of the crossover episodes in the Static Shock TV series are really good.
Who does he cross over with?
The first crossover is, I believe, season 2, episode 13, called Toys of the Hood, and that's it's where I guess a villain called Toyman or something like that tries to capture Static's
It's like the Batman villain.
friend.
Toy?
Yeah,
Okay.
Superman villain.
Superman. Oh.
And Superman shows up and saves the day, and then Static saves him, and there's a lot of back and forth, and it's pretty good. And then later, at the end of season 3 and the beginning of season 4, he meets up with Batman
And Robin, right?
and Robin,
Yeah.
and then he gets shot into the future, and then he
Oh,
gets partnered with the guy in Batman Beyond,
Okay.
Terry.
Terry McGinnis.
right, to save future Static, who is apparently the most well-known, best famous superhero the world has ever known.
How do you jump through time?
There was some sort of glitch with whatever they were solving in the original world.
So,
You asked.
Glitch
Yeah.
in the Matrix.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
so yeah, I've seen the at least the first crossover with Batman and Robin where the Joker's the villain, and
Right.
that was some Super Friends level campy. I gotta say, it was like there's like a cement truck that Joker runs into and puns when he gets captured. Like, yeah, it was.
Going off that, I mean, the whole show I think is just full of those moments. I mean, one of his big villains is called Rubber Band Man. So
Right. Yeah.
He's a resistor.
I mean, it's-
Oh yeah, and I mean Rubber Band Man is clearly sort of a nemesis of his because Rubber is an insulator and he can't really do anything to this
Exactly.
guy.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty evident that they like
at him. Like,
very much made that show for like 10 to 12-year-olds kind of thing, and it's okay. And I think it introduced to the character to a whole genre, because I feel like if that show didn't exist, I would never know the character of Static, even if he's being announced as, Jaden Smith playing him, right? Because I've never read a Static comic, and I read plenty of comics, and it's just not a character that's necessarily appealed to me.
Right.
and maybe because there's other electric powered people, and they haven't really put him on a spotlight like they have other characters. Even for his themes, I mean, Static is one of the very few black protagonists that's very prevalent. There are plenty of like black characters nowadays kind of throughout comics, but Static's up there with, you know, Miles Morales, Luke Cage, Storm, Jon Stewart. Even if he is like possibly a lesser known character than some of those, he still holds the kind of role that they hold in the DC universe.
And in the animated TV show, he is a huge fanboy of Jonathan Stewart.
Yep.
And there's even an episode, I think it's season 4, episode 4, where he, you know, saves the day or whatever with Green Lantern. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of like, oh my god, that was Green Lantern, and he's just fanboying the whole time.
So I'm kind of interested in, like, nowadays, then, where does he stand among those other heroes? And, like, do you feel he has the same sort of pull, importance that these... because, like, obviously these characters are role models to a lot of people, and it's interesting, like, is the character of Static doing as good a job in this role as someone like Miles Morales, who's sort of revolutionary for being, you know, the Black Spider-Man. He was one of the first young African-American teenage superheroes, and, like, to be a Spider-Man is, like, enormous, right? And there's a lot of people who have talked about, like, it just being like emotional and like really powerful to finally have that kind of superhero. So I'm sort of interested in, where do you feel Static is in that realm?
Like, as far as how
influential
people
how
feel about him?
Influential, yeah. How,
well,
like...
if we're talking influence, Static was, I believe, according to the wiki, grains of salt, originally conceived for Marvel Comics. It just never ended up going to them. Mm-hmm. And he was more or less based on Spider-Man. So he's kind of like the proto Miles Morales.
Okay.
And you see that a few times. He references Spider-Man a couple times as like a hero who he wants to be, pretty directly.
So do you feel it's like maybe a fair, maybe smart move of DC to make this project to like make a Static? Is it a TV show or a movie? I'm sorry.
Web series?
I'm not sure what it is.
The
with Jaden.
one coming out?
Yeah. Is it a movie?
I believe it's a film.
I believe it.
Oh.
Yeah, I thought it was a movie too.
Well, do you think that's like a wise move, or like is Static deserving of this? Because obviously, you know, that's coming before Jon Stewart Green Lantern in the DC universe. That's coming.
I mean, it really depends on what Static they go with. Are they going to make it childlike and campy and try to make it just this like dealing with powers in high school thing, or are they going to make it like a gritty exploration through dealing with drugs and violence and things like that?
So apparently it's not 100% official, and it's going to be a digital series.
It's a web series,
okay.
It's
That's
a web series, yeah.
Well,
the directors just dropped the name multiple times.
Okay.
I mean, obviously it depends on how well they execute it. But personally, I feel regardless of whether they go with gritty or just plain, you know, like here's a young character, more or less the DC answer to Spider-Man. I think it's a win-win as long as they execute it well.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
they're basically beating Marvel to the punch on, you know,
They need
Miles
to
Morales.
execute it well on that, but they also need to have a well-thought and intelligent analysis of African-American inner-city culture.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a big point. He lives in the city. He's African-American, and they need to do that justice.
Yeah, and from what I can tell, the major themes of both the comics and even the show, it's gang violence, it's drugs, it's it's urban living poverty, like, and I feel that if you don't take that seriously,
you need to take it seriously, or it's
just
insulting.
Yeah.
Right. In both the TV show and the comic book, his mother was a paramedic who went to the scene of sort of a gang fight and ended up being shot and killed. Okay. And so he has this huge sort of thing with gang violence always around his life. His dad runs a YMCA, and, you know, takes in troubled kids and things like that, and sometimes gets into trouble that way.
Do you find some of that cliche, or do you think they did some of that stuff first? Because nowadays some of that stuff is that's just cliche, owning a YMCA in the area of the city.
I mean, I suppose that it's a bit cliche, and it sets up a lot of, you know, what happens in the comics. But I think it's also done in a way where it brings that subject to the forefront of Static's life, and he has to find a way to deal with it, and it creates sort of another aspect of, does he join gangs? Does he work with gangs? Does he stop them?
So it poses lots of moral
completely,
questions.
yeah, some moral questions. Another big thing that's in the comics that's not shown, I don't think it's shown at all in the TV show. I could be wrong because it's been a while. But in the comics, he has a friend named Richard Stone, right? Who's not in the TV show, although Richard Foley is basically the same character. But Richard Stone in the comics, known as Rick, he deals with homosexuality. And so Virgil Hawkins is sort of confided in by Rick Stone in that he is gay, and Virgil doesn't know how to deal with that, and a lot of his friends don't know how to deal with that. And it comes up a lot when Rick Stone gets bullied and things like that, where Virgil kind of stands back and doesn't want to say anything, or he sort of like withdraws himself from the situation, and there's a lot of issues with that. And that does span almost 8 or 10 issues of a storyline for Rick Stone.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah. And it ends up with Rick Stone and a few of Virgil Hawkins' friends going to like gay rallies and things like that, and trying to.
And that's back in like
deal
the
with
90s and early 2000s.
Right. That would have been in like 95.
It's almost slightly ahead of its time in a way.
Yeah, right around it.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm sort of not surprised that this comic had a difficult time selling. Not because of its quality, but it's like hit or miss whether a comic that takes on heavy issues sort of succeeds. It's also generally difficult to do it with a superhero, because a lot of the time when you hear about comics that take on really serious issues, being critical successes, it's stuff like Mouse and Persepolis, which
one-off
are
graphics.
graphic novels that are like documentaries in a way, and it's not a superhero that adds sort of like, no matter how you do it, it's a little bit of a ridiculous touch, because it's, you know, someone flying or going at super speed or shooting beams out of their eyes. So it is it's interesting that they, you know, attempted this. I think it's good they attempted this. I think it's an even bigger accomplishment of DC to have managed to keep the character even somewhat relevant for the past 2 decades.
Yeah.
Despite the subject matter.
Right.
It's just a matter of how are they going to bring this up now with potentially Jaden Smith.
In the mobile version of Injustice, you can download and play as Static, which is pretty cool. And then I believe in the normal version of Injustice, Shazam can actually have a Static outfit.
That's cool.
Oh, that's kind of cool. It's like, what do you guys think? What do you want from this web series? Like, what's everyone looking for?
I want him to be a geek. I'm okay with them copying Peter Parker. I'm okay with them doing a different take on what a geek would be, but it's a key part of Static is that he's a nerd, and that's why he's acceptable.
But I think he's a hip hop nerd. He's an urban nerd. He's not. It's not necessarily the type of nerd you think about who's like sitting behind a computer.
Well,
and a pocket protector.
Not the stereotypical Hollywood take on a nerd.
Yeah, it is.
No, I mean in the comics and in the TV show, he is actually quite nerdy, and he does end up, well, at least in the TV show, he ends up going to like a technical school for, you know, computers and mechanical engineering and stuff like that. In the comics, it's not explored as much as some of the other aspects of his life, but he does, you know, have posters of comic book heroes on his walls. He does have computers. He plays video games. There's even a scene where he plays role-playing games and things like that.
Okay. So he could just be a total nerd.
So he is quite nerdy, but he's also wrapped up in that gang culture, which is oftentimes seen as a sort of total opposite, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would love, personally, for this to... Like, I still don't know what the hell DC's plans are as far as cross-pollination. Like it's pretty clear that the whole Arrow universe isn't going to be part of the cinematic universe, but then we still don't know about the new Teen Titans show, if that is its own thing or tied in with anything. But I would love for Static to eventually have his own gang of actually good guys and, like, get to know, like personally, my favorite, like, DC characters, Tim Drake, the third Robin. And they are very similar. They're both, like... fairly nerdy, very competent, and like I would love to see those characters interact, or even just Static with a group of young heroes.
Yeah, Static does join on several occasions Teen Titans. He never becomes like a full-fledged member, but he's seen as like an honorary member on an occasion, and has interactions with like Cyborg and even Superboy and Kid Flash, or is that his name? Kid Flash?
Yeah.
The issue though is it's a web series. It's not going to be
So
able
what
to
can they do?
It's an
divulge-
introduction.
Yeah,
if
it's an
anything.
introduction. I think it's just going to probably be an origin story with maybe a flash forward into the future, but they're not going to have that much. And web series it's very rare for them to get so popular it skyrockets.
Right. My guess for the web series would be that they deal with, Static pre-powers and him getting bullied, and then somehow, I don't know what method they'll use of getting him to the gang war, whether it's through his own fruition or through being coerced by other gang members, I don't know. And then I think they'll stick with the first villain who shows up in both the TV show and the comic book, Hotstreak, who's this Francis Stop or Martin Scarp.
Is that like the classic villain if you're going to pick one?
He's the first villain that Static has to learn to deal with. He's a pyrokinetics, I think is what they call the power. He, spawns fire and throws fireballs and things like that.
That's neat.
Right. Well, we'll hope it turns out. I mean, I know we're not going to turn this into like an actor hunt. I know some people have different opinions on Jaden Smith and what he can do and what he's has done in the past. I know that you personally would have picked a different actor, but I mean, it's kind of, we'll see what they do and hope it's for the best. There's no need to like just try and nitpick actors. Just gotta kind of hope.
Yeah, it's just not a good choice.
So I guess to wrap up, if someone wanted to get into Static, sorry, I'm way too used to the show from my little bit of exposure. If someone were to get into Static, what should they go seek out?
Oh, well,
Justin.
Yeah, sure. Finding the comics is actually really hard.
I'm not surprised.
Are they rare?
They're not rare.
But they're not around.
They're not around. You might get lucky and find some of them, especially maybe the later issues. But like finding, the first couple issues.
You gotta
you're
go
gonna
on
have
eBay.
Yeah, you're gonna have a tough time. And then even they're not really that expensive, I guess, but they're maybe like $30 to $50 for.
Are
like,
there
issue
any
one.
bound books on Static at all?
No.
No.
No, they haven't made a single collection.
You can't even get the TV series as like a volume set. You have to get like those stupid.
Right.
Oh, yeah, never mind.
I did find a website that has every episode of the TV show up. I actually found it this morning because I was trying to figure out which episode was the Batman Beyond thing, and I wanted to watch it because it's been a while.
All right. Okay. Well, it's hard to find, but regardless, if someone is going to put the effort to track down Static media, should they go track down the comics or the TV show? For simplicity's sake.
Depends what you're looking for. If you want something campy and fun, go find the TV
Yeah.
show. If you want to read something that, brings up a lot more moral questions for Static, go look up the comic book.
All right, then a simpler question. Is there any part of Static's history they should avoid that was just poorly written, that isn't nearly as good as... Who wrote the, main 45...
Avoid anything that's New 52. Because that DC.
I haven't read it.
He
New
is
52
in
at
New
all.
52.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just
they
they made-
if he's in there, it's probably not worth reading.
They
It's new
made one Static comic, or maybe 2 or 3, I don't know, and it didn't sell at all. So
They canceled his
canceled
ongoing
it, yeah.
series. Yeah.
But there's
still
rumor
shows
that
up.
he might come up in some of the other stuff more often than not.
Well, the new pictures of him, it's kind of intense. He has lightning bolts in his eyes. His suit is covered in lightning.
Right.
He's
Grim Dark or Bust.
Right.
pretty much. It just went dark and dreary for the...
Well, yeah, and I mean, it's funny because in the episode where he goes to the future and meets his future self, where he's like the big powerful superhero, it's exactly that. He's got white eyes. He's just surrounded by electricity. He walks through and he just snaps his finger.
How
and
old
just
is he
starts
in that?
I mean,
killing.
I'll be honest, it's very cool looking, but...
He's in that they jump forward about 40 years, so he's probably in his mid 50s,
50, 60.
Okay, yeah. Because he shows up in a couple of Justice League episodes.
where he should be about in his mid 50s.
Yeah, he's in his mid-60s by then.
Mid-60s,
And John Stewart comments, he's like, you look
Yeah.
good. And he's like, 65.
What does he look like
30s,
in
but-
those?
He's got more or less the same costume, and he's got white hair and white beard, and he's a grown-ass adult. still rides
Right,
around. On
that's
that
another
memo
thing. The
cover.
costume that he wears, I think I said it actually earlier,
So
comes
he's
out in
almost like
2000.
Zeus. He's just,
Is what?
he's just Zeus.
Totally.
That
Zeus.
outfit is
Yeah.
first drawn in 2000,
Okay.
in this sort of like rebirth of the comics. Right.
What
before
did he
the
wear
TV show.
initially?
Initially, he wore all black with sort of a little symbol that's similar, and then he wore a black baseball cap.
Oh, it's a very just standard vigilante.
Right.
That's pretty cool.
All right. So, if you want to track down some stuff on Static and get them to Character More, try and find those first 45 issues of his comic release back
All of
from
them.
the 90s. Yeah, all of them you can. And honestly, the TV show isn't a terrible representation. It's probably better than some of the new 52 stuff.
Yeah, if you've got a strong stomach for cheese, like it's
Campy cheese and puns.
it's perfectly good.
Yeah,
It's just,
if you're a DC fan, you probably already have a strong stomach for cheese. I'm just going to put that out there. But anyway, thank you for joining us. This has been Hero History on Static. Again, I'm Reed.
Justin.
Patrick.
Peter,
You guys have a good night.
cheers.
Subscribe and watch our other videos.
Don't do it. Don't do it.
But actually do it. And cut all that out. Is that how you wrap it?
Yep.